For 30 years, Johnny Carson made everyone in America laugh. He had perfect timing when he told jokes. He was charming and natural. Every single night, he hosted a show called The Tonight Show. It became something people loved watching before bed, like a special routine full of laughs and fun. But there was a lot happening behind that big, perfect smile that the audience sitting at home never got to see. There was stress, hidden secrets, and some really awkward moments that were so bad, NBC, the TV company, tried to make them disappear forever. Some whole episodes just vanished into thin air. Some interviews went really, really wrong. Some friendships fell apart and nobody talked about it out loud. Carson wasn't just some guy who hosted a talk show. He was someone who wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. He was protecting his TV empire by staying in control of everything. But even someone as careful as Johnny Carson couldn't stop the crazy things that sometimes happen when you're on live television. What you're about to read are the stories that slipped out by accident, the shocking fights between celebrities, the lost videotapes that nobody can find anymore, and the nights that were so bad they even left Johnny Carson feeling shaken up. These were the moments that the TV producers tried really hard to hide. These are the truths they could never completely cover up. The lost episode that never aired. It was supposed to be just another normal, smooth night at the TV studio in Burbank, California. The audience came in and filled up all the seats in the studio. The band started playing their opening music, and Johnny Carson walked out from behind the big curtain. He was smiling, looking sharp and handsome, and totally ready to do his show. But before the opening credits could even finish rolling on the screen, something went terribly, horribly wrong. The show that happened after that was so wild and so disturbing that the big bosses at NBC decided to bury it completely. They made it disappear. There's no written record of what was said. There's no rerun tape. There isn't even a note in the production files that this show ever existed. People who worked on the crew later whispered about that mysterious night, but only in little pieces of information. Some people said that one of the guests had an emotional breakdown right there on stage, in front of everyone. They said the guest was shouting and crying, or they revealed some secret that was so shocking it left Carson sitting there frozen, unable to say a single word. Other people claimed that a huge fight started backstage between people working on the show, and then it spilled out onto the stage where everyone could see it. A few people even believed that Johnny Carson himself snapped under all the pressure. They said he couldn't get control of the situation again. For a man who built his entire career on perfect timing and staying calm and classy, this was completely unthinkable. After the show was over and the broadcast ended, NBC called an emergency meeting right away. They took all the footage and locked it away in a safe place. Soon after that, they destroyed it completely. A few people who worked there tried to get copies of the tape later on, but they couldn't find anything. It was like the episode had never even happened in the first place. Even the official NBC catalog, which is like a big list of every show they ever made, had no entry written down for that date. The videotape was erased and wiped clean. The film reels were actually burned up, and all the staff members who worked that night were told to just forget it ever happened. Johnny Carson himself never, ever mentioned what happened that night again. When people asked him about it years later, he would either brush it off like it was nothing, or he would change the subject to something completely different. The people who worked closest to him said that night haunted him. They said something that happened during that show cracked the carefully controlled image he had spent decades building up. He was never quite the same after that. one former producer admitted years later. He laughed less when the cameras weren't on. The mystery only got even deeper after Johnny Carson died in 2005. Fans of the show and television historians went searching for any tiny trace of evidence. They looked for a single photograph, or an old note from the archives, or a witness who could remember more details. But nothing ever came up. Nothing surfaced. The show remained like a ghost in NBC's history, a night that had been completely erased from public memory. The Joan Rivers betrayal and the fall of a friendship. For more than 20 years, Joan Rivers was Johnny Carson's closest friend and ally in the world of late-night television. He discovered her way back in the 1960s. He gave her her very first big break in show business. He even told her on the air during her very first appearance on his show, "You, Ray, going to be a star." To Johnny, Joan was the perfect guest. She was witty and fast and fearless. She could make anyone laugh. To Joan, Johnny was more than just a mentor who taught her things. He was like family to her. But in 1986, that close bond between them shattered and broke apart in one of the most painful betrayals in television history. When a new TV network called Fox offered Joan Rivers her own late-night talk show, it was a really big deal. It was historic. She was going to become the very first woman ever to host a show in that late-night time slot. But she made one really big, critical mistake. She didn't tell Johnny Carson about it. The contract for her new show wasn't officially signed and finalized yet. Joan was afraid that the news would leak out to reporters, or that the whole deal would fall apart and collapse. She was planning to tell Johnny once everything was certain and official. But before she could do that, the media and newspapers broke the story first. When Joan finally called Johnny to try to explain what happened, he hung up the phone on her. He didn't say any words. He didn't give her any chance to apologize or ask for forgiveness. Just silence. Just the phone going dead. That same exact night, Johnny ordered NBC to ban Joan from ever appearing on The Tonight Show again. It was permanent. She was never invited back for the rest of his lifetime, not even once. This wasn't just Johnny being angry about business and work stuff. This was personal heartbreak. Carson had built his entire empire on loyalty and trust between people. And to him, what Joan Rivers did felt like the ultimate betrayal. The fallout and consequences were absolutely brutal. Joan's new show on Fox really struggled and had bad ratings. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, who was the producer of her show, took his own life just a few months after the show got canceled. Joan was completely devastated. She was grieving and mourning for her husband. And at the same time, she had lost the friendship of the man who once called her a star on national television. But Carson never reached out to her. He never called or wrote a letter. The two of them never spoke to each other again for the rest of Johnny's life. In later interviews that Joan did, she said that the silence haunted her and made her sad. "He was my hero," she admitted, "and losing his friendship was like losing part of myself." When Joan finally returned to The Tonight Show stage in 2014, nearly 30 years later, Johnny Carson was long gone. He had already passed away. It was a full circle moment where everything came back around, but it arrived way too late. The person she really wanted to see wasn't there anymore. Wayne Newton's confrontation, and the night Carson was threatened. In the 1970s, Johnny Carson's opening monologues were legendary and famous. They were sharp and fearless and often really cutting and mean. But there was one person who kept becoming a target of his jokes, and that person took those jokes very personally. Wayne Newton was a singer who performed in Las Vegas. People called him Mr. Entertainment. But on The Tonight Show, he became a punchline, like the butt of a joke. Carson would tease Wayne about his flamboyant, fancy style. He made fun of his appearance. He even hinted and suggested that Wayne might be gay. For years, Wayne Newton laughed it off. He thought it was all just in good fun and part of the show. But when the jokes didn't stop and kept going and going, something inside him finally broke. Behind all those bright lights, Newton was fighting hard to protect his image and reputation. The rumors that people were spreading, saying he was effeminate or secretly gay, started to affect his career and his personal life in bad ways. He called Johnny Carson's office at NBC multiple times, asking Carson to please stop making those jokes about him. But each and every call went unanswered. Nobody called him back. Finally, after putting up with months and months of humiliation and embarrassment, Wayne Newton took matters into his own hands. According to the people who actually witnessed what happened, Wayne Newton stormed into NBC's Burbank studios one day without any warning or announcement. He headed straight for Johnny Carson's office. He walked right in. Inside the office, Johnny was in the middle of a production meeting with his longtime producer, Fred de Cordova. Wayne Newton interrupted them and demanded to have a private word with Carson alone. The whole room went completely silent. When they were finally alone together, Wayne Newton reportedly said, "If you ever make another joke about me, I'll kick your ass." Johnny Carson, who was normally calm and impossible to shake up, didn't laugh at all. He just stared back at Wayne. The people who knew Johnny say it was one of the very few times in his life that he actually looked genuinely shaken and scared. After that day, the jokes about Wayne Newton stopped completely, but any friendship between the two men also stopped. Carson never invited Wayne Newton back to be a guest on the show ever again. Years later, Wayne Newton spoke publicly about what happened that day. He called Johnny Carson a mean-spirited human being. He accused Carson of fueling and spreading false rumors that nearly destroyed his reputation and career. Wayne claimed that because Carson had so much influence and power over NBC and the entertainment press and media, it made it impossible for Wayne to defend himself properly. "It wasn't comedy anymore," Wayne Newton said in an interview. "It was cruelty." The confrontation became a dark legend and famous story in Hollywood. It was the night when a guest dared to stand up to the king of late-night television. But for both men, it left scars and bad memories. Wayne Newton's career never fully recovered from all the gossip and rumors, and Johnny Carson's reputation as a quiet but ruthless perfectionist only got stronger and deeper. When Charles Grodin challenged Carson on air, by 1990, Johnny Carson was completely untouchable. He had outlasted his rivals and competitors. He had survived scandals. He had made it through all kinds of network politics and drama. But one night, a guest walked onto his stage and actually dared to challenge him in front of millions of people watching at home. That guest was Charles Grodin. He was an actor and satirist who was known for his deadpan humor, the kind where you can't tell if someone is joking or being serious. He was really good at blurring the line between comedy and real confrontation. What started as a routine, normal interview quickly spiraled and turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in the entire history of The Tonight Show. Charles Grodin had been a regular guest on the show for years. He often used dry sarcasm to poke fun at the whole talk show format itself. But this particular time, his tone felt different. It felt more serious. Midway through the segment, after a few awkward exchanges back and forth, Grodin leaned in toward Johnny and asked him a question. "Do you even care about your guests?" The question hit like a slap in the face. The entire audience fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Johnny Carson, who was usually super quick with a clever comeback or quip, froze for just a split second before replying in a sharp tone. "Of course I do." But Charles Grodin didn't back down or let it go. He pressed further and kept pushing. He started questioning whether the interviews were even sincere and real. He was basically implying that Carson was more interested in keeping his own spotlight than actually caring about the people sitting across from him. What followed wasn't comedy at all. It was pure tension. The laughter from the audience died out completely. It was replaced by a sense of disbelief. Nobody in that studio knew if this was an act they were watching, or if it was an actual real argument unfolding live on television right before their eyes. Johnny Carson's face got tight and tense. His voice, which was normally smooth and measured and calm, became clipped and defensive. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, and definitely not on his own stage in his own show where he was always in control. When the segment finally ended, the applause from the audience felt forced and fake. The smiles looked rehearsed. But behind the scenes, the producers were absolutely stunned and shocked. Some of them urged Johnny to cut that whole segment out of the reruns completely. They were worried it exposed too much of his real temperament and personality, the parts he usually kept hidden. But Johnny Carson refused to cut it. "Leave it in," he reportedly told them. "People should see it." That decision became one of the most revealing moments of his entire career. It showed Johnny Carson not as the flawless master of charm and control, but as a real human being. Someone who could be defensive, proud, and tired of pretending all the time. For once, the king of late-night television wasn't in complete control, and it made for one of the most riveting and painful interviews that ever aired on The Tonight Show. Shelley Winters throws a drink at Oliver Reed. Live television has always carried the risk of chaos and things going wrong. But even by The Tonight Show's standards, and they'd seen a lot, the night that Shelley Winters and Oliver Reed shared the couch became totally unforgettable. It was 1975. Both actors were on the show to promote their new projects and movies. Oliver Reed was a British actor who was known for his wild behavior and heavy drinking. He had already built a reputation for pushing boundaries and going too far. Johnny Carson expected there might be some trouble, but not what actually ended up happening. As the conversation began and they started talking, Oliver Reed grew more and more unruly and out of control. He started making a whole series of crude, sexist remarks about women in Hollywood. He even made comments about Shelley Winters herself, who was sitting right there next to him. The audience chuckled nervously. They weren't sure whether Reed was joking around or if he was just being obnoxious and rude. Shelley Winters was a seasoned performer. She was an actress who had spent her entire life fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated industry. At first, she tried to brush off Reed's comments and ignore them, but Oliver Reed just kept going. He got louder and ruder and more vulgar with each line that came out of his mouth. Finally, Shelley had had enough. She couldn't take it anymore. Without saying a single word, Shelley Winters picked up her drink from the table and threw it straight into Oliver Reed's face. The studio audience gasped out loud. Johnny Carson's jaw dropped open. Oliver Reed just sat there completely frozen, with liquid dripping down his face and off his chin. Meanwhile, Shelley Winters calmly crossed her legs, looked at him, and said, That's for every woman you've ever insulted." It was one of the very few moments in Johnny Carson's entire career when he looked genuinely speechless. He literally didn't know what to say. The tension in that room was thick, not the playful, fun kind of tension, but something raw and real and serious. For once, late-night comedy had turned into an actual confrontation. The segment ended early before it was supposed to. During the commercial break, Johnny Carson reportedly turned to his producer and muttered under his breath, "We can't rerun this." The NBC executives agreed with him completely. When the show aired again in reruns later, large portions of that exchange were cut out to protect the network's image and reputation. But word spread really quickly anyway. The unedited broadcast from that night became a legend among late-night television historians. It was proof that beneath all the laughter, The Tonight Show could actually become a battlefield. In later years, Shelley Winters laughed about what happened. She said in interviews, "I don't regret a thing." Oliver Reed, on the other hand, never apologized for his behavior, and he never returned to The Tonight Show ever again. For Johnny Carson, it was another reminder that even the most carefully controlled environment could fall apart in just seconds. And sometimes, the most unforgettable moments on television are born from pure, unfiltered truth. The chaos of the animal segment. Johnny Carson was known for keeping his cool and staying calm in almost every situation, except when wild animals were involved. That was his weakness. Viewers absolutely loved the recurring visits from a zookeeper and animal expert named Joan Embury. Her appearances with exotic creatures brought laughter and unpredictability to The Tonight Show. People never knew what would happen next. But one night back in the 1970s, that light-hearted tradition turned into pure panic and chaos. It gave Johnny Carson one of the most uncomfortable moments of his entire career. It started out totally normally. Joan Embury walked onto the stage holding a small monkey. She was cheerful and happy as always. Johnny Carson cracked a few jokes about the monkey and the audience laughed along. But then, as Joan tried to hand the little animal to a guest who was sitting beside Johnny on the couch, the monkey suddenly lunged forward out of nowhere. It grabbed the guest's hand with its tiny fingers and refused to let go. The startled shriek that came from the guest threw the entire room into confusion and chaos. Johnny Carson tried to lighten the moment and make a joke about it. But before he could even finish his sentence, another animal handler came walking out onto the stage. This time, the handler was carrying a large snake. And that's when everything truly unraveled and fell apart. The snake somehow slipped from the handler's grip. It started slithering across the stage floor under the bright studio lights. It was moving fast. Johnny Carson's composure and calmness completely vanished. He jumped up from his chair. He started backing away in genuine, real fear. The audience gasped and screamed. The cameras kept rolling and filming the whole thing, but Carson's face told the whole story. This wasn't an act or a bit. He was actually terrified. Crew members rushed onto the stage to try to contain the chaos and catch the snake. But the damage was already done. For nearly a full minute, which is a really long time on live television, The Tonight Show, which was supposed to be television's most polished and perfect production, descended into complete, unscripted madness. The producers backstage were absolutely horrified. They had a big debate about whether they should cut the entire segment from the reruns to protect Johnny Carson's image. But Carson reportedly refused to let them cut it. He knew that audiences actually loved seeing the moments where his perfect control cracked and broke down. Still, after that night, future on E. Mal segments came with much stricter rules. They used fewer unpredictable species of animals. They brought in more handlers to help, and absolutely no snakes were allowed anywhere near Carson's desk ever again. The clip from that night has survived over all these years. It's one of the very few times that viewers got to see Johnny Carson completely out of his element. You can see him shaking. You can hear him laughing nervously. And you can hear him admitting out loud, "I don't get paid enough for this." It reminded everyone watching that even a man who spent decades mastering live television could still be humbled by the unpredictability of real life. It was funny on the surface. People laughed about it. But for Johnny Carson, it also revealed a truth he often tried really hard to hide. The truth is that behind every perfect moment of comedy, there was always a little flicker of fear that he could never quite control. The myth of Zsa Zsa Gabber's cat joke. For decades and decades, one of the most infamous and famous stories linked to Johnny Carson involved an actress named Zsa Zsa Gabber and her cat. As the legend goes, the story says that Zsa Zsa Gabber appeared on The Tonight Show one night holding her pet cat, and she supposedly asked Johnny Carson, "Would you like to pet my pussy?" And Johnny supposedly replied with a quick comeback, "Sure, just move the damn cat." The line became a staple of late-night folklore. It got repeated by comedians everywhere. It was quoted in books about television history. It was even treated as fact by some fans who swore they remembered seeing it. But here's the big twist and surprise. It never actually happened. There is no videotape of this moment. There is no transcript or written record. And there is no official file showing that such an exchange ever aired on television. NBC archivists, the people whose job it is to keep records of everything, along with Carson's staff and television historians, have all confirmed the same thing. It was an urban myth. It was a made-up story. It was a joke that grew out of Johnny Carson's reputation for making witty double meanings and clever wordplay. Over time, people told the story so many times that it started to feel real. It replaced actual reality in people's memories. Ironically, the myth itself became a reflection of just how much power Johnny Carson had over pop culture. His image and reputation were so iconic and larger than life that people were willing to invent stories just to make him seem even sharper, funnier, and more daring than he already was. The moment never aired on television, but in a strange way it didn't even need to. The legend was enough. The story became real in people's minds, and that was almost just as powerful. Johnny Carson was way more than just a comedian who told jokes. He was an entire era of television. He represented a time in American history. His laughter filled living rooms all across the country every single night. But behind all that laughter were moments of tension, silence, and chaos that actually shaped television history. From the lost episode that nobody can find, to the feuds and fights, to the forbidden clips that got cut from reruns, these were the cracks in an otherwise perfect legacy. Maybe that's exactly why we still talk about these moments today, because perfection is never the whole story. The real, messy, complicated truth is always more interesting. Which one of these moments shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age.